Vehicles are a relatively new artifact subtype introduced in the Kaladesh block. These are artifacts that can be turned into creatures, usually with the crew ability. These cards have only been around for about 6 years, but there's already been quite a few successful vehicles. So today, we're going to go over the best vehicles in the game. And at number 10, we have Mizzium Tank. This is a 3/2 vehicle with the mana cost of 1 and 2 red. It has Trample, meaning it deals excess combat damage to defending player or planeswalker while attacking. It also has the ability where, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it becomes an artifact creature and gets a +1/+1 until the end of the turn. It also has Crew 1, meaning you can tap creatures with a total power of 1 or greater in order to turn it into an artifact creature until the end of the turn. Tank was a pretty good deal, but it was never really insane. A 3/2 with its abilities for 3 mana would have been good if it was a normal creature, but being a vehicle usually makes a card worse overall. Needing to either have a non-creature spell or a creature on the board to turn the card on for the turn made it difficult to actually use when compared to just normal creatures. So while the card stat line was good, it saw less play than it normally would, as using it as a beater in your aggro deck was usually less consistent than using other cards. However, while being a vehicle has multiple downsides, it has some upsides that come with it too. Since they aren't creatures during your opponent's turn, they can actually be more difficult to remove in a lot of circumstances. The most important is the way that vehicles will usually dodge board wipes. A Wrath will normally put an aggro deck very far behind by answering every card they play, but since vehicles will be an artifact when your opponent casts it, they'll be ready to attack next turn with no issue. This gives vehicles like Tank a niche in standard formats, where they can often be used as a sideboard piece against decks whose removal is mainly sorcerer speed, as they'll be unable to touch the tank most of the time. And since the tank is easier than normal to turn into a creature, it was especially good in this role, easily able to survive Wraths and swing in for tons of damage on the next turn. Now, Tank only saw a bit of sideboard play back in Standard and only makes it onto this list thanks to how new vehicles are and how few of them there really are. And at number 9, we have Cultivator's Caravan. This is a 5/5 vehicle with the mana cost of 3. It has the ability where you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color and has a crew of 3. This is basically a fusion of a mana rock and a vehicle. This makes Caravan a very versatile card. You see, getting extra mana early on is an incredibly strong effect. Being able to cast extra spells in your turn or cast more expensive cards a turn early can really turn the tide of a game. However, as games go late, the extra mana starts to matter less as both players start to have more than enough mana to cast their spells and are more limited by card advantage rather than mana. At this point, ramp spells tend to be very bad as they give you more of a resource that you don't really need. Caravan does a great job of shoring up this weakness by being able to become a creature later on. A 5/5 is quite a big body, and while Crew 3 is quite a bit, it's still not too difficult to pay that cost. Especially back in the standard format, it can be played alongside cards like Toolcraft Exemplar, a 1 mana 1/1 that gets +2/+1 at the start of combat on your turn if you control an artifact. This allows you to crew Caravan with a 1 mana creature, which is incredibly powerful. The combination of being such a large threat and also being a mana rock early on led to the card seeing a ton of play in its standard format, but it didn't see play in any of the other older formats. And at number 8, we have Fleetwheel Cruiser. This is a 5/3 vehicle with a mana cost of 4. It has Trample and Haste, meaning it can attack the turn it enters the battlefield. It has the ability where, whenever it enters the battlefield, it becomes an artifact creature until the end of turn, and has Crew 2. Cruiser is a very above rate threat outside of being a vehicle. A 5-power attacker with Haste and Trample is great for 4 mana, and being able to attack with the turn you play it without even needing to use any other creature to crew it. This made Fleetwheel Cruiser a great curve topper for aggro decks back in its standard format, as it would often leave your opponent with very little life left over, and even if they had a board wipe, you'd get to keep your cruiser. And if you were able to play practically any creature in your next turn, you could crew your cruiser to attack for another 5 damage, as the crew ability doesn't require you to tap creatures that aren't summoning sick. While its main home was in its standard format, it also seen some play all the way back in Vintage. There, it is played in a deck built around Mishra's Workshop, a land that you can tap for 3 colorless mana, but you can only spend this mana on artifact spells. This lets you cast Cruiser on turn 1 with the help of something like a Moxen or any of the other busted ramp cards legal in Vintage. However, usually you'd wait until later in the game to play a Cruiser, as one of its best uses is taking out planeswalkers. 5 damage is usually enough to kill a walker, and of course in the late game, it was a great way of dealing a lot of damage to your opponent fast and ending the game for you. So while Fleetwheel is the most universally powerful vehicle, it still managed to find a niche in one of the most powerful formats in Magic. And at number 7, we have Parhelion II. This is a 5/5 legendary artifact vehicle with a mana cost of 6 and 2 white. It has Flying, meaning it can't be blocked by creatures without flying, First Strike, meaning it deals combat damage before creatures without First Strike, and Vigilance, meaning attacking doesn't cause it to become tapped. It is the ability where, whenever it attacks, you create 2 4/4 white angel creature tokens with Flying and Vigilance that are attacking. It also has Crew 4. This card was pretty bad when it released, as it simply cost far too much mana to cast and required you to have 4 power worth of creatures on top of that. This made casting and attacking with it very impractical, to the point that most players simply wrote the card off. However, this all changed with the release of Greasefang Okiba Boss. This is a 4/3 legendary rat pilot with the ability where, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you return target vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, and then you bounce it back to your hand at the end of your turn. Greasefang was the perfect partner for Parhelion. Not only could it reanimate it for you, it also had exactly 4 power. This means that you could Parhelion into your graveyard and then play Greasefang, bring your Parhelion back, then tap your Greasefang to crew it. This would let you attack for a crazy 13 damage as early as turn 3. Even better, Greasefang's downside of bouncing the vehicle doesn't apply to the angels Parhelion creates. So this combo also leaves 2 4/4 angels on your board. This combo is the backbone of a deck in Pioneer, and while the deck isn't top tier currently, it's still one of the better decks in the format. And at number 6, we have Aethersphere Harvester. This is a 3/5 artifact vehicle with a mana cost of 3. It has flying and the abilities where, when it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy, and you can pay 1 energy to give it lifelink until the end of the turn, meaning dealing combat damage makes you gain that much life as well. It also has Crew 1. This card was just a great threat for its cost. It has basically the smallest possible crew cost, making it fairly easy to get up and running. A 3/5 flyer for only 3 mana is often really good, as it has enough power to pressure your opponent or their planeswalker very effectively, and 5 toughness makes it very hard to kill without using a removal spell. The lifelink was also really nice, as it made it really hard for your opponent to aggro you out of the game. You didn't really even need any other energy cards to support it. Getting only 6 life off the card was usually more than enough to make the difference and let you stabilize against an aggro opponent. This led to Aethersphere being a bit of a sideboard staple in its standard format and in Pioneer, where players would bring it against their opponents who weren't prepared for a flying lifelinker. And at number 5, we have Heart of Kiran. This is a 4/4 legendary artifact vehicle with a mana cost of 2. It has flying, vigilance, and crew 3. It also has the ability where you can remove a loyalty counter from a planeswalker you control rather than tap creatures to pay its crew cost. Heart was an absolute menace back in Standard, being one of the best cards in the Standard format for most of the time it was legal. While Crew 3 was a lot, especially for a 4/4 vehicle, combined it with the aforementioned Toolcraft Exemplar made crewing it a lot easier. While you were only getting 1 extra power, Heart of Kiran would far often have much better attacks than your Exemplar would. Flying is basically the best form of evasion in the game, so Heart would usually be going unblocked on most boards. And while tapping your creatures to crew Heart wasn't always optimal, the ability to remove loyalty counters from your planeswalker to crew it made the card very easy to turn into a creature. There were a lot of really strong planeswalkers in Standard with Heart, such as Gideon, ally of Zendikar, and Chandra, Touch of Defiance. Removing a single loyalty from your walkers to activate your Heart was more than worth it, as the damage and board presence would usually be way more impactful than your walker being able to survive getting hit by 1 more damage. It also helps a lot in defense, as Heart having vigilance means you can go on attack and defense on the same turn. Normally, this would require tapping 2 creatures, but with Heart's ability to be crewed by planeswalkers, you can far more easily attack and block on the same turn cycle. After rotating out of Standard, Heart settled into Pioneer, where it's seen a modest amount to play in a variety of decks. And at number 4, we have Esika's Chariot. This is a 4/4 legendary artifact vehicle with a mana cost of 3 and 1 green. It has abilities where, when it enters the battlefield, you create 2 2/2 green cat creature tokens. Whenever it attacks, you create a token that's a copy of target token you control. It also has Crew 4. This is what a lot of players will call a board in a box. This single card can allow your board presence to go from nothing to several creatures, which can really help you stabilize when you're behind on board. This alone is already on curve, and while it wouldn't make the card playable on its own, having a little bit of extra upside would be enough to make the card good. Of course, Chariot has a lot more than just a little extra upside. It can also easily advance your board state, letting you flood the board with an army of cats. If your opponent doesn't kill the Chariot right away, they're likely to have to deal with an uphill battle as Chariot runs away with the game. The thing is, Chariot is basically impossible to answer without losing card advantage. Even board wipes will still at least leave the Chariot behind. The Chariot alone isn't always the best card, but it can easily start making more tokens and start getting you a ton of card advantage all over again. Chariot was a great threat in Standard, and that success has continued into Pioneer, where it sees some play in builds of Greasefang and in decks like Devotion to Green. And at number 3, we have Skysovereign Consul Flagship. This is a 6/5 legendary artifact vehicle with a mana cost of 5. It has flying and the ability where, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. It also has Crew 3. Skysovereign is a very strong threat, and a big reason for why it's so strong is how it has an impact on the game the second you play it. Skysovereign will usually kill something as soon as you play it, and if your opponent doesn't kill it before you untap and attack with it again, it'll snipe a second creature, and then a third, and so on and so forth. And since it has a massive 6 power and flying, the flagship can end the game in a hurry as well. All of this makes Skysovereign a real beating whenever it comes down. However, it does have a couple of limitations that hold the card back. You see, 5 mana is still a lot, and aggro decks can often run decks over before they have a chance to even get a card like Skysovereign out. On the other end of things, control decks often won't be playing enough threats for Skysovereign to shoot, so it won't be getting much value. In that matchup, you would normally want to play stickier threats that are harder to remove, which is a description that Skysovereign doesn't quite fit. So the card is extremely powerful against any sort of mid-range deck or a deck based around playing lots of creatures, but things like Burn and Control are pretty bad matchups for it. To account for this, people are far more likely to sideboard the card, bringing the card in for matchups where it really shines. Skysovereign has consistently been used in this way in its old standard format and in Pioneer for quite some time, and will continue to see play for years to come. And at number 2, we have Smuggler's Copter. This is a 3/3 vehicle with a mana cost of 2. It has flying and the ability where, whenever it attacks or blocks, you may draw a card, and if you do, you discard a card. Smuggler's Copter is one of the most infamous vehicles in all of Magic. It's so powerful that it was banned from its respective standard format and is currently banned in Pioneer. So, why did this card need to be banned? Well, the issue with the card isn't how it was played in a specific deck, but rather how easy it was to play in so many decks and how good it was. While it was legal, basically every aggro or creature-based deck played Copter, to the point that it was completely ubiquitous. Copter was extremely well statted and had an incredibly easy crew cost to pay. 2 mana for a flying 3/3 is a great deal. It allows you to put out a lot of damage extremely easily, and is basically impossible to block favorably without spending far more mana than the Copter play did. On top of the combat prowess, the ability to loot anytime it gets into the red zone helps players sculpt their hand into their exact liking. It is worth bringing up cards like Merfolk Looter, a 2 mana 1/1 that you can tap to draw and then discard. Looter isn't even close to the card it used to be, but for a long time, Looter was considered a great card. Paying 2 mana for the effect to loot once a turn was considered a fair deal. So getting that on top of an overstated creature was crazy. The combination of a great beater and a huge boost to consistency was something that every deck was interested in, and that's not even getting to the possible synergies with cards like Scrap Heap Scrounger. Copter is maybe the best vehicle when it comes to just being a good attacker, but there's one vehicle that's just a bit stronger. And at number 1, we have Unlicensed Hearse. This is a vehicle with a mana cost of 2. It has the abilities where you can tap it to exile up to 2 cards from a single graveyard, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards exiled by Hearse. It also has crew too. Hearse is a great piece of graveyard hate, but its ability to double as a threat is fairly unique. The closest parallel are cards like Scavenging Ooze, but Ooze only triggers when it eats creatures and requires more and more mana to keep munching on cards in the graveyard. Hearse gets to grow faster and easier, and the biggest downside the card has is needing to be crewed to attack. Hearse is a lot closer to cards like Torment's Crypt and its ability to mess with graveyards. And dealing with graveyards is an effect that decks will always be interested in, as graveyard-focused decks are both very common and very powerful. For a quick example, recall the Greasefang and Parhelion combo, which could be entirely shut down by a timely Hearse activation. And after the Hearse finishes shutting off your opponent's combo, you can start crewing and attacking your opponent. A 6/6 or larger Hearse isn't uncommon to see in the late games of these matchups. Now, since Hearse's main appeal is shutting down certain decks, it's also mainly a sideboard card. However, Hearse's success has extended much farther than any other card on this list. Hearse has found success in basically every format in Magic, from Pioneer all the way back to Vintage. Considering how much success the card has seen, it easily takes the top spot on this list. Alright, and that's the video. Are there any vehicle cards you think we may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one? If so, we'd love to hear about them down in the comments below.